Hello and welcome everyone to my new series called Come Now and Let Us Reason Together, where we explore together all of the stuff that's in Isaiah. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this is because I'm not a scholar. Guys, I cannot emphasize enough how few credentials I have to even be doing this podcast. it is really audacious of me, I think. Either audacious or inspired. I choose to think it's inspired, but I leave it into your hands to determine if that's the case. We'll let the Spirit ratify that on your end. But I've just noticed, especially this last go around as we've been studying Come Follow Me with the Book of Mormon, how much emphasis there is given by the Savior in 3 Nephi 23 to the importance of the book of Isaiah. Here's what it says in 3 Nephi 23, verses 1 and 2. And now, behold, I say unto you that ye ought to search these things. Yea, a commandment I give unto you that ye search these things diligently. For great are the words of Isaiah. For surely he spake as touching all things concerning my people, which are of the house of Israel. Therefore, it must needs be that he must speak also to the Gentiles. So, the most recent reading of that, it just like stuck my heart that I have not been giving Isaiah my due diligence. And as I started to notice just how many chapters in the Book of Mormon are devoted to Isaiah, I know we've all heard this over and over again that we really should be searching and seeking in the book of Isaiah to understand it and have the spirit of prophecy while we do. And I just have not been doing that. So, what I wanted to do with this podcast was have you join me. As an incredibly average person myself who does not have scholarship in the book of Isaiah, I figured we could discover together its contents. And as I learned something from all of these different sources that I've got, I wanted it to share it with you so that this could be a discussion point. It could be a jumping off point to help all of us better understand Isaiah and therefore obey Christ a little bit more fully and receive more joy. Because I'm pretty sure that when Jesus commands something, it's just so that we can rejoice better and have better vision and greater faith and just have a better relationship with Him in general. So join me now for the book of Isaiah. And we're going to take a look today at Isaiah chapter 3 and some of the nuances included. Before I jump into the actual book itself, I wanted to give you the list of things that I am using as resources for this purpose. Number one, it is called Sepharia.org. That is Sefaria.org. It is a website that lists the Hebrew biblical texts, an English translation. It also gives the opportunity for commentaries that other Jewish scholars have had all along the way, as well as you can highlight one of the words in the Hebrew text and it will give you a translation and definition of what that word is. Now, sometimes that gets a little tricky because we don't always know which words are which words in the Hebrew context, and especially since it's an entirely different alphabet, you can't really approximate which word is this part being translated into English. So to help with more of the translation process and understand the definitions of words better, I go to blueletterbible.org. So that's blueletterbible.org, no spaces, all together. And you can type in a specific scripture, say, I want to look at Isaiah chapter 3, and you can find that verse, and with a few clicks, you can find what the specific Hebrew word was and the definition of that Hebrew word. Because it lines up with the English, you're able to better pinpoint which word it is that's being translated from the Hebrew into English. And if you're curious about it, you can go into deep dives, see how often that word has been used in other passages of Scripture, I find that to be really helpful, especially when I'm remembering that this book was written for Hebrew speakers. And if they were listening to this as it's being read to them in synagogue, then they would hear a word and have an association with that word because they've heard it elsewhere. It's very similar to our phrases when we say once upon a, and you know the next word is time, because we've heard that over and over again. It's a critical part of our storytelling that when you hear a word or a phrase, it's supposed to hyperlink you to another story that happened before or another concept that is a theme throughout the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Tanakh. So I find that to be incredibly helpful. And then the last two things that I use as a reference point as well is on LDS.org, the Institute Manual for the Old Testament has a section that gives you really good chronology and historical content on the world of Isaiah. And then also, they reference heavily a gentleman called Edward J. Young, and he has a 3-volume series where he breaks down in detail with references all of the book. He goes verse by verse of the book of Isaiah and explains it. Explains different interpretations of a specific word or even a tense that's used. So it's very in depth. It can be a little bit hard to read just straight through. So that's why I find it helpful as a reference text, much like the Institute Manual does. But sometimes the Institute Manual doesn't give me as much information as I want to know. So there you go. And maybe along the way, I'll be listening. I may list for you like a YouTube channel or YouTube video that I use as a reference point. Because sometimes I do like, even though I'm, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's probably been abundantly apparent so far as I've been listening my references. But I do like to listen to sermons and preachings from other faiths as well, because I find that since they have only had the Bible to analyze and look at for hundreds of years, they've really looked into the nooks and crannies of things that we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints haven't. We have so much canon that we haven't devoted the amount of time, effort, and energy and focused attention that people in other faiths have. So it's really advantageous to use their skill and their wisdom to understand things, along with rabbis. If they're going to explain something in the Old Testament, I love listening to rabbis. So as I use those references, I will let you know what they are. Whew, that was a way longer intro for the reference portion, and the reason why I'm doing this than I thought. I am so sorry. But let's jump into Isaiah chapter 3, starting right now. Okay, so let's just jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and read from Sepharia.org in the translation that's given there. It's different from the King James Version, so you can read along with the King James Version, or you can read along on the screen with Sepharia. But let's go. For lo, the sovereign God of hosts will remove from Jerusalem and from Judah prop and stay, every prop of food and every prop of water. Now, prop gets translated as a staff in the King James Version of the Bible. So both staffs and stays they're not super common words that we use in everyday lingo. It would be the equivalent of a staff is like a cane, something that supports someone who's weak, or like a crutch. And then a stay, also not used very often. But it makes me think, honestly, of like all the YouTube videos that I've watched of modern corsetry. I know it's a weird thing. I get down weird rabbit holes, and corset making is one of them. And what they used to call the channel that doesn't have like boning in it, but has a whole bunch of reinforced sewing, that's a stay. And the purpose of it is to support the woman. So either way, whether you consider it to be a staff or a cane or a stay like in modern corsetry, it would be a support, something that upholds you and upholds your strength and gives you the ability to move and function. Okay, so as I was editing this podcast, I realized that I didn't actually include any information about the Hebrew words for staff and stay, and I think they are very helpful and insightful to better understand. So let's look at those. The first word that gets translated from the Hebrew of into staff in the King James Version of the Bible, it's mish'ain, and it's the masculine noun, and it just means a support or a staff, kind of like a crutch. But what's interesting is that the next word that gets translated into stay is mes'ena. So it's the feminine version of the same word, masculine version and feminine version, which is cool because that's to say how replete and how complete the supports are. So it's also a support, it's just the masculine version and the feminine version of a support or a staff, which is to suggest that every form of support is going to be removed. Every form of a crutch or a staff or whatever it is that you've been leaning on, no matter what it is, that is going to be removed from you. That's what I should have included, but I didn't, so I'm including it now as a little extra excerpt. Okay, now to continue on with our regularly scheduled programming. So, when here is Jehovah addressing Jerusalem and Judah and saying, you guys have become so wicked, I need to remove your support structures. Just like if I were to remove food and water from you, you'd find out just how weak you really are. I'm going to remove people from your city and your civilization that are holding you up. And he continues on in verse 2 to explain exactly who he's going to remove and what the effect is. So, starting in verse 2, soldier and warrior, magistrate and prophet, augur and elder, captain of 50, magnate and counselor, skilled artisan and expert enchanter. So, magistrate is more like a judge, somebody who dispenses justice. Augur, I looked this up and I can't really entirely remember. Let me double check it. Oh yeah, it's a soothsayer. So what's being described here are not only legitimate sources of support for the society, actual leadership that dispenses justice, but also the illegitimate leadership that is in the society. The things like fortune tellers, witches, sorcery, all of that stuff that doesn't actually legitimately guide or help the people, that's also going to be removed. So legitimate sources of support and illegitimate sources of support are being uprooted at the same time. Let's keep going. Verse 4. And I will make boys their rulers, and babes shall govern them. So since the experienced leadership in Jerusalem is going to be removed, all that's left are the inexperienced rulers that are going to come in. So that's why he says, boys are their rulers and babes shall govern them. It's talking about the level of experience that this leadership has, or rather doesn't have. And there's a really fantastic commentary in Edward J. Young's book where he says it's the same word that's used to designate Rehoboam getting counsel from inexperienced people in the book of Kings. So I'm going to go ahead and reference that story and explain that story, since I I didn't know this until I researched it, so you might not know it either just off the top of your head when I say the word Rehoboam, or the name Rehoboam. He was Solomon's son. He was next in line for the throne. It was while the kingdom was still united. And he has the people, like when he begins to reign, all of the people come to him and say, we've been taxed really badly by your dad before. I mean, he was making the temple, so it makes sense. And they asked him, can you just tax us less? So, in 1 Kings 12, verse 6, this is what we read. And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, how do ye advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. And he said unto them, what counsel give ye, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, make the yoke which thy father did put upon us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but make it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. Isn't that the audacity? That's pretty audacious. Okay, and now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So, the result we see in verse 12, chapter 12, verse 12 is, so Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old man's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men. Wherefore the king hearkened not unto the people. In verse 16 it says, so when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? Neither have we an inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. And this is what begins the fracturing of Judah the tribe of Judah and a little bit of the tribe of Benjamin staying in Jerusalem, and the northern kingdom splitting off with the other 10 tribes that are led by Ephraim. Ephraimites take charge at that point, which is significant in the gathering of Israel. Who is it that is charged to gather Israelites? Ephraimites. Now, it is impressive symmetry that the people who are tasked with gathering the 10 tribes are the very people who broke off from Judah to begin with. Incredible. So, that whole story was to illustrate what it looks like when somebody is inexperienced in leadership and listens to the youth and the foolishness of youth, quite frankly, and what the devastating consequences could be. You could fracture your entire kingdom that your father built. It was a great kingdom before this, and now it's split in two. So, continuing on in Isaiah chapter 3, we can see that one of the byproducts of having boys be their rulers and babes govern them is the people shall oppress one another, each man oppressing his fellow. The youth shall bully the elder, and the despised shall bully the honored, which is a dramatic reversal of how societies work. People oppress one another instead of as an American, so I'm speaking from an American perspective, there's this rich history of saying, you do you, boo. I live in the land of liberty, which means if I'm free to do what I want, you need to be free to do what you want. It's very laissez-faire. So to experience a society where that is not happening, where your neighbor is actually up in your business, being vitriolic, getting on your case, and you're doing that to them back, and everybody's doing this to each other, this is pure chaos. Every man oppressing his fellow. Pure chaos. Social cohesion, dead. The youth shall bully the elder. That is rank disrespect because it's not acknowledging any of the wisdom or the work or the effort that previous generations have put in to providing for you. They're bullying their elders. And the despised, those that are in the lowest class of people, they are actually picking on those who have been successful, those who are honored. So what this honestly reminds me of, and this is like a Dara interpretation here. So, let the Spirit either confirm or deny what I'm about to say. I won't be offended if you disagree. But what I hear when I read this verse specifically is what happens when communism is practiced, especially the theory behind communism. The main crux of this argument, and if you want more detail in extremely intelligent layout of the breakdown of communistic theory and practice, James Lindsay with the New Discourses on YouTube, he's phenomenal at laying all of this out. But the main crux of communism is that there is a ruler class, an oppressor class, and an oppressed class. And that throughout history, there's been this same dichotomy between a ruler class and an oppressed class. They may have been called different names and had different systems in place, like feudalism or capitalism. It doesn't matter what you call it. The same problem still occurs where there are few people in power and there are many people who are not, and they're being oppressed by those who are in power. Thinking of the world in those terms leads to this outcome, where we have the oppression Olympics, where everyone determines, I am in the oppressed group, therefore I have a right to revolt against you. Also, what's fundamental in communism is completely destroying history and saying, whatever has happened before, we're going to do a radical departure from it. There is no tradition. There is nothing that remains from the previous systems and the previous history that existed before, because everything has become new through this proletariat revolution. So that's what I read in verse 5. I think that's an example of the same kind of attitudes that exist in this society that Jehovah is describing. This is what's happening in Jerusalem, and what will happen in the future as he pulls out all of the supports that Jerusalem had. As you have inexperience, foolishness, and chaos ensuing, what you get are people oppressing each other, their neighbors oppressing each other, the youths despising the elders, and those who are like on the streets, lower class, who have been outcasted in some way, are bullying those that are successful or being envious of the success of the people around them. We kind of see that now, don't we? We have some amount of animosity that occurs in classism in America, where if you have less, you're predisposed to being more envious of those that are successful. Now, that's not the American way. The American way is to congratulate everyone for their successes because we work on a meritocracy, at least we're supposed to. So we can see now how our society is being infiltrated by these same kinds of ideas, and we can see it being played out where people think that they're virtuous if they are oppressed. So we can kind of picture what's going on in Isaiah when we look at our own societies. Now, this part in verses 6 and 7, this blew my mind as I started to consider the implications of this. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. For should a man seize his brother, in whose father's house there is clothing, and say, "Come, be a chief over us, and let this ruin be under your care," and the other will thereupon protest, "I will not be a dresser of wounds, with no food or clothing in mine own house. You shall not make me chief of a people." Now, in the history of mankind, when have you ever heard of someone denying power and saying, "No thanks, I don't want to rule this people"? The history of mankind is people vying for power. That's why Game of Thrones was such a big idea. We see it in other passages of scripture in the Book of Mormon. I mean, if you're reading in Ether and seeing how many sons usurp the throne from their fathers or put their fathers in exile after taking their throne, like it is just rampant and common, extremely common for humans to think, "I can run this better than you can. And I want the power so that I can run this better than you can." What we see here is that things in society are so bad that nobody wants to be in charge. Nobody wants to bring order out of this chaos. That is how intensely bad the situation is. That is how poverty stricken they are, because they're willing to say, "You have a set of clothes that is functional and nice. Therefore, you must be doing something right. Therefore, you should be our ruler. You should give us the decrees and the edicts that will help reorganize our society and remove the chaos that exists." So yeah, it's just astounding to consider that things in a society are so bad that nobody wants to be in charge. And the specific word that's used when it says, "Come be a chief over us." If you meander over to the blueletterbible.org, so just blueletterbible.org, just for clarity's sake, you see that the Hebrew word used here, sorry, my words, getting a little tripped up. So the word used for chief, that's translated as chief in Sefaria.org, is katzin, which is a ruler, a chief, a commander, a dictator, someone who's in authority and issues edicts. That's essentially it. They're like, all we want you to do is just tell us what to do, which is nuts, because the very thing that they're in trouble for with Jehovah is the fact that they did not want to do what Jehovah told them to do. So it's just like rubbing salt in the wound, knowing that these people are so deprived, they are in famine, they are in poverty, their society is chaos, they have uprooted every social structure that normally existed, and their solution is to look to another person and say, "What we need is order, so we don't care who, we just need somebody to take charge." And there's Jehovah being like, "What am I, chopped liver?" Like, they are denying the greatest king they could have had, the one who provides them rain, the one who told them how to take care of their land and let it rest every 7 years, the one who gave them 10 commandments because they asked him to, the one who is in a bound covenant with them where he just says, "Look, I I will live with you in a tent in the wilderness. I will be among you. I want to be your king and I want to serve you. And here they are saying, not that guy. We don't want Jehovah, but we'll take this guy. He's got a nice set of clothes. Like, wow. Like the amount of blindness and just revulsion against Jehovah is just palpable when you consider the fact that they're willing to take anybody but him to be their leader. So here's where the pathos starts coming out in verse 8. Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen, because by word and deed they insult God, defying God's majestic glance. Their partiality in judgment accuses them. They avow their sins like Sodom. They do not conceal them. Woe to them, for ill have they served themselves. And just as a reminder, back in the episode where we talked about Isaiah chapter 1 and how we get a glimpse of how God sees things. When God looks down at his children and he sees that they're sinful, he's not looking to give them shame or guilt or to look for a reason to walk away from them. No, what he sees is sickness. He sees people who are covered head to toe in boils and sores that have not been bound up. And he knows that because he is the one who can heal those sores, and they have not come to him. They've refused to get help. So when he sees the fact that in verse 9, they avow their sins like Sodom, they do not conceal them. This is a people who proclaim to everyone else, this is my sin, and I'm not changing. So y'all need to get used to it. That's what they're doing. That is distinctly different from someone who goes to other people or to God in prayer or to a bishop or a spiritual guidance counselor of sorts and says, this is something that I'm struggling with and I need help changing it. That's not what these people are doing. They are proclaiming their sins like Sodom did, and they don't hide the fact that they are sins. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah, I know, is a point of contention for a lot of people out there. And I've been thinking of that story a lot because we don't like stomaching situations in the Old Testament or in Scripture in general where we see God be destructive, frankly. We don't like it. I don't like it. What has helped me as I've considered the situation with Sodom and Gomorrah is even though we're given a very small description of what Sodom and Gomorrah is like, it's a very powerful description. So in the Middle East, it is a big deal to be hospitable. They live in an inhospitable environment. There's very little water, very little vegetation. You have to know where to go. And if you're anywhere unlike Saudi Arabia, they have floods that come out of nowhere. Like if there's a snowfall that happens in the mountains kilometers away, it could create a flash flood further down the peninsula that no one could expect or see coming, and it can kill you. So like their environment is very inhospitable. That's why it's such a big deal that when you come and take a place of rest at another person's door, they provide well for you. They give you water, they give you food, they give you a place to stay. They will sleep on the floor if they have to and give you their own bed. There's a lot of hospitality in this area. And in Genesis, we see an excellent contrast. When these holy men, these angels, come to visit Abraham, he slaughters a calf for them. He provides bread for them. He gives them water. He attends them personally. Even though he has all of this great estate, he makes sure that they are comfortable and they are taken care of. Now, Sodom, once these same holy people come into Sodom, the first reaction and the way that they greet these people is, let's rape them. Let's exert sexual dominance over them. Let's humiliate them. Let's make sure that they walk away from this scarred. That is how they greet people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And I can't remember where I read this, but if you have information to the contrary and want to say that's not true, then let me know. But from what I understand and what I read, Sodom and Gomorrah were these two cities that were in the middle of a highway. So it's a long stretch of highway between destinations, often in the Middle East, and you have to traverse them in horrible conditions. So the fact that there's these two cities where you can take refuge and lodge on your journey, it means those are the only places you can go to take refuge in your journey. They get travelers there all the time, and those travelers may get trapped in that city. They have no alternative. They need water. Water is in the city. And if they go into that city, they're going to be raped. That is just what it's going to be. So, in Sodom and Gomorrah, they don't hide the fact that they abuse people sexually. And you best believe, even though it doesn't say this in scripture, I'm willing to bet that in Sodom and Gomorrah there is pedophilia. In Sodom and Gomorrah there is sex trafficking. In Sodom and Gomorrah there is every form of abuse. Every form. So when Jehovah is speaking in Isaiah and saying, "My people avow their sins like Sodom, they do not conceal them," that is a commentary on just how morally deviated these people are. These people were supposed to be representatives of God to the world, and instead, they engage in human child sacrifice to Baal, or they engage in sexual practices of other worshipped gods in the area. It's sexual practice. It's like misconduct. And this is like a society where God told them, if you catch anybody committing adultery, you stone them. And so they know better. They know differently. And yet here they are still worshiping other gods, which is not only so such a betrayal to the relationship with the God that they've made promises to, but like a deep betrayal. So this like really illustrates the point that when Jehovah is looking down on these people that he's made covenant with, the chosen people, and he sees them avowing their sins like Sodom, they're not hiding them and they don't want to change, he's heartbroken. And just as a reminder too, in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, before the angelic visitors go into the city, you have, it's called the angel of the Lord. That could mean like the spirit, or it could mean somebody else who is looks like Jesus who showed up, or it could be Jesus himself. The same verbiage is used in Lehi's vision, where it's the angel of the Lord that brings him through the wilderness. So I'm inclined to think that like Jehovah himself shows up, but I could be wrong. Whatever it is, it's a holy person. It's a messenger of God. They're looking over the bluff at Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's then that Jehovah, or his surrogate, says that whole city is going to be destroyed. And Abraham, he is a merchant. He is a traveler. He is a haggler. He begins to haggle. And you got to assume that underneath that haggling is this question of, is this just? I mean, wiping away an entire city? How could you possibly do that? So that's what's behind this. But wait, will you spare it if there are 50 good people there? Not only is he trying to gauge the justice of this God and trying to see, like, are you willing to be merciful? But he's also trying to haggle. So that's why he gives a highball number of 50. And what's really interesting is that Jehovah doesn't bargain back. He says, yeah, I accept that bid. If there are 50, I'll spare it. And I'm pretty sure Abraham was expecting him to lowball him back. That's what you do when you haggle. You put out a bid, the person retorts with something that's lower. Jehovah doesn't do that. He's like, yeah, sure, 50, I'll take it. And then Abraham has to start bidding with himself and says, what about 45? And he's like, yeah, sure. What about 30? Or 40? Of course. 35. Yep. 30. Yep. Back and forth until it whittles down to 10. And then at that point, Abraham is silent. And one can only assume that, well, and what I assume in that story, so this is an assumption, I get it, is that at that point, Abraham gets that Jehovah has already considered all of this. When he issued destruction on Sodom, it was with mercy that he made that decision. and that Abraham can trust it. He can trust that Jehovah is merciful even when he does destructive acts like that. And in a society like this, I mean, we in modern society, we take a lot of things very seriously. We take rape seriously. We take pedophilia seriously. We take abuse seriously. So we're still sensitive enough to know, like, Sodom's a bad place. It's a bad place. And if Jehovah can look down and see that Sodom is so bad that the only way to be just is to get rid of it, then you know that place is bad, yo. And that he is executing mercy and justice at the same time. Mercy because he's not allowing another innocent soul to be born into that society and immediately corrupted. And justice because of all of the victims that they have created there. Those victims need justice. So that's what I think of when I think of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's what that story, I think, is supposed to reveal and unpack. So to be equivocated, for Israelites to be equivocated with Sodom, that's a big deal for them. That would be a huge insult. And I imagine if people were listening to Isaiah, if he was speaking this to them, they would be up in arms. They would not be happy with him. It would be a huge insult. All right, moving on to verse 10. Hail the righteous, for they shall fare well. They shall eat the fruit of their works. Woe to the wicked, for they shall fare ill. As their hands have dealt, so shall it be done to them. Which I love. This is one of the verses in verse 10 where it talks about eating the fruit of your works. I love this imagery because everywhere else in Scripture that I've seen it, I think it's just the perfect example of what relationships are. Relationships are like fruit. You have to spend a lot of time in that initial investment cultivating the plant before it will give you something good. And so it's wonderful to see him use that same imagery here, saying that there will come a time when they will reap the fruit of their labors, and it will be sweet to them, to the righteous specifically. Okay, verse 12. My people, sorry, my people's rulers are babes. It is governed by women. O my people, your leaders are misleaders. They have confused the course of your paths. Now, a quick thought when it comes to talking about being governed by women. I don't know how many women are going to be listening to this. I don't know how you feel about that. Here's my take on this, because the word that's used for govern is actually dominion. They exercise dominion. That's the word that would have been said in Hebrew. So when people hear this, they would think automatically, would hyperlink them to Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, and where the hierarchy is set up by God for people. So it would be dominion, that's supposed to be Adam's role. That's what they would think. So when instead dominion is exercised by women, we would see this is another breakdown of the hierarchy and organization of society. And instead of being organized according to what God had commanded, we're being organized according to our own desires. Now, that's not because women are bad at governing or make bad judgment calls. I am inclined to think that, God trusts women with leadership. We see that all the time in the church, in relief societies, in as sister missionaries. There are a lot of opportunities for women to experience leadership. So that's not the problem. The problem's not women. The problem is the fact that they, as a society, have willfully rebelled against God's order. That's what the problem is. And even though I'm still trying to discover why was it that men were given the dominion, and what do they have to offer in comparison to women? I have a lot of thoughts on the subject, but I'm still thinking through it. I know that, no matter what, God loves his women. He loves his little girls. He loves his sons. And that he had organized us in these partnerships for our greatest joy and to help us work together. So in verse 12, when it says that they're governed by women, it's just saying things are not organized properly. And that's my interpretation. So if the Spirit says something different, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to hear your interpretation of that verse. Okay. 13. God stands up to plead a cause and rises to champion peoples. God will bring this charge against the elders and the officers of this covenanted people. It is you who have ravaged the vineyard. That which was robbed from the poor is in your houses. How dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor, says my sovereign God of hosts. God said, because the daughters of Zion are so vain and walk with heads thrown back, with roving eyes and with mincing gait, making a tinkling with their feet, my sovereign will bear the pates of the daughters of Zion. God will uncover their heads. Okay, so a quick caveat or warning, I suppose. Like this language in the original Hebrew is quite divisive. So when it says words like pates, I was like, what the crap is a pate? In verse 17, my sovereign will bear the pates. And in the King James Version, it says they will discover their secret places. So when you look up the original Hebrew word, it's poth, Pohth, or at least that's the English spelling. The word does mean secret parts, but then an additional connotation is it is female genitalia. So this is a very like, whoa, you are going to be like what you thought was hidden. It's not hidden. God sees it all. Even the most private things will be made bare. And think about that, man. How excruciating and humiliating that would be to have everything exposed. Everything exposed. Well, I mean, if you're not someone who follows God, being exposed is terrible to think of. But when you actually know God, it's not that big of a deal. Like you feel like, oh, good, I'm glad you know every part of me, and we can just move forward and work on it together. So, and that is something that seems like a good segue to mention. When God is talking about these consequences, the things that he's going to exact of his people, so often it feels rehabilitative to me instead of retributive. So in verse 17, when it says that God is going to uncover their heads and make bare the pates, really, that's a good thing. That is a good thing for us. If we are sick, we need to have our wounds cleaned out. And that means whatever we're using to cover them that is putrefying and decaying, we need that removed so that we can have the wound actually addressed and cleansed. It's painful, but it is necessary for life. So I think it's a good thing if this people is so rife with sexual misconduct, they need that conduct exposed. And they need it exposed not in the Sodom way where you're like, yeah, sure, we do pedophilia here and we're just going to acknowledge that that's the new norm. Like, not like that. We're talking about actual people being held accountable for their decisions. And same thing at the end of that verse, in verse 17, where it says God will uncover their heads. The word used there is also mind. So we'll be able to perceive what is in each other's minds. Their intentions will be made known. Now, I can't remember which book this was. I'm sorry. So once again, take this with a grain of salt. But there was a book where people had near-death experiences, or they came back from death experiences, and they explained what life is like in the next world, you know? And there were several of them that mentioned the fact that you can't hide your thoughts. Everyone can perceive what you're thinking. And think about that. If you are in a position where you're trying to hide who you are and what you've done, that is painful. It's excruciating and it's humiliating. If you're living your life with God, then you start to see how, as he heals you, those things that you used to be considered painful and that you tried to hide and that would be embarrassing, they aren't painful anymore. You like talking about them because you see it as the point where God's grace touched you. It's very similar in my life. That has happened to me when I will talk about how I used to be kind of a sexist and I used to be mistrustful of all men. I wouldn't ever admit that because I was trying to be a good Christian, you know, and say that I'm a good disciple of Christ and Christ loves everybody, so I should love everybody. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was if I was in a room alone with a guy, I would immediately start to sweat and panic and think about, like, how do I protect myself if something happens? Every guy. And not every guy demands that kind of reaction. That was me. Yeah, that was me being judgmental of a man just because he's a man. So now I don't mind talking about that because I have been reclaimed from it. And I see that, like, wow, I am so glad I don't live like that anymore. And who changed it? God changed it for me. He gave me back a wonderful relationship with my dad that has just solved so many of my problems. And it is a source of joy for me now to talk about it. So, um, having everything be made bare and uncovered is actually a therapeutic thing. It's designed to help people heal. In my opinion, I think that's what he's doing. Same thing with removing all of these governors and these judges and their sorcery and stuff. All of that is supposed to help people see, let me show you that you're relying too much on what other people think, or you're using this law as an excuse to be unjust to someone. All of that gets removed because Jehovah is trying to show them that what you really need is me, yo. I I am your healer. Come to me. So I think that's what's beautifully articulated in this poetry, starting in verse 18, where we're talking about the daughters of Zion, right? And their hypocrisy. So here's what it says. In that day, my sovereign will strip off the finery of the ankles, the fillets and the crescents, of the eardrops, the bracelets and the veils, the turbans, the armlets, the sashes, of the talismans and the amulets, the signet rings and the nose rings, and of the festive robes, the mantles and the shawls, the purses, the lace gowns and the linen vests, and the kerchiefs and the capes. All of that stuff that we use to ornament ourselves and make us feel special and like we're higher status or we're trying to hide how we feel insecure, all of that gets removed. And what happens? And then instead of perfume, there shall be wrought. And instead of an apron, a rope. Instead of a diadem of beaten work, a shorn head. Instead of a rich robe, a girding of sackcloth. A burn instead of beauty. And all of that, in my opinion, is not God saying, this is what I'm going to cause. It's simply saying, this is what exists already. This is what you were covering up with your lace gowns and your linen vests and the tinkling ornaments and everything that was supposed to throw everyone else off and make them think that you were fine and dandy. You're not fine. I know you're not fine. When it talks about a rich robe and sackcloth, sackcloth is what the Jews would put on because it's uncomfortable, it's itchy, and they would put it on when they would mourn, and they would cover themselves in ashes and sit on the ground too. All of that is to show, like, I am in so much pain that I'm going to reflect on my outside how I feel on the inside. So what's being stripped away with all of these different pieces of jewelry and fine clothes, we see that underneath all of that really is someone grieving, someone who's wounded, and someone who needs to be ministered to. And the best way, if you've ever grieved for something, you know this. The best way to heal is to move through that grief, is to let it wash over you. Let yourself mourn the loss. And then you can move forward. And then you're no longer carrying it with you. And then God can come to you and say, I know there are some things in this world that aren't permanent, but I am permanent. All of that, all of what's being discussed in this chapter 3 is to show Israel, you guys aren't okay. I know you're not okay. And I'm going to show you that you're not okay. Everything that you're using as a crutch, I'm removing it so that you know you're not fine. You're not healthy and you need help. So, just to close off with the last two verses, her men shall fall by the sword, her force in battle, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she shall be emptied, shall sit on the ground. See, there's that imagery of mourning. This is actually the status of Jerusalem. As a society, they are a soul-sick society, and they need to be healed. So that is what Jehovah is doing. He is removing everything that's a distraction and showing them you're not okay. But what happens in chapter 4, is one more illustration in the first verse of just like how destitute the society is. It's so bad that the wars that they waged have changed the ratio of men to women from 1 to 1 almost to 1 man for every 7 women. That's how bad it is. And that means that 7 women are widows. At least that's the language that's used here. It's assumed that these women are widows. So it talks about that in the next verse. But then after that, the rest of chapter 4 is to say, don't worry, there's a day coming where I'm going to restore you to your radiance and glory and beauty. And there's a lot of really great imagery for Jewish wedding customs in there that are super cool to unpack. So, thank you so much for joining me on this foray into reading through and going slowly over Isaiah chapter 3. Hopefully, it was a good pace for you and helped you think more on what these concepts are and what the imagery is, because so much of Isaiah is imaginative, and it's imagery and it's poetry, and it's meant to wash over you and touch your heart. Sometimes it kind of bypasses your brain to do that, to just touch your heart. So hopefully a little bit of that has been done today. If there are any questions, concerns, things that you disagree with, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. All right, have a great rest of your day. Bye.